Hello and welcome to VeritasPopuli, Truth for the People. I'm your host and producer of the show, Dan Meredith. On VeritasPopuli, we explore many different areas: historical, political, spiritual, cultural. We believe that the truth, like a precious metal, no matter how hard you rub it, it will only become brighter. Today, we're honored to have three guests return to us. Pam Addington is a family court judge from Hardin County, Kentucky. We also have Connie Reguli, who is a Tennessee attorney who practices family law, and Denise Hobbs, who is a licensed social worker and the executive director of the Center for Family Development, which has offices throughout Middle Tennessee. Welcome, ladies, and thank you for coming back.
Thank you, Dan.
It's good to be here.
Last time you were here, we talked a lot about divorce and the negative consequences of divorce and your experiences with seeing families in a lot of sort of distress and problems that they've had in your courtrooms and also in your experience as a counselor and social worker. Today, let's look more at some different aspects of families. We had talked about maybe some results of families breaking up, and we thought about maybe talking about some issues related to maybe some criminal results or criminal issues that might crop up around families breaking up. Tell me about some of your experiences with this.
Well, you know, before I went into family law, I was a prosecutor, and I prosecuted in domestic violence. So that was back when domestic violence was kind of the boutique thing to do. We had our own special investigative unit and our own courts and our own people to look into it. And the one thing that I found is that it's horrible. Domestic violence is horrible. The control within a relationship, within a bad relationship that sometimes results in violence or kidnapping or controlling. I mean, I saw the worst of the worst. But there's also times when that is misused, and it is, there are false allegations made, and they just are. And, you know, I jokingly, and I don't want to minimize domestic violence, but I would have 40 people on the docket, and I'd have about a minute to talk to each victim. And I would sometimes say, you know, if in 30 seconds I wanted to slap the victim, maybe I should look at whether or not I should prosecute this case, because and you know, again, I'm not undermining it, because when it's bad, it's bad. And I prosecuted guys for putting duct tape around women's ankles and throwing them in a truck, and you know, and keeping them for days held hostage. So I understand there are two extreme views of it, but again, that gets back to the things we started touching on in the last one, is relationships. You know, how do we train people to have healthy relationships, conflict resolution, and communication?
Yeah, I think that really gets down to it. I was involved with someone one time that was involved with a domestic abuse situation, and the question was asked, when a man gets upset, he hits a woman. Well, what does the woman do? She can't hit back. Well, the answer in many times, sadly, is she just calls the police. She gets mad. What she does, she calls a bigger man who arrests her husband. And so then you have this battle back and forth, and sadly the law has involved themselves here, where you have a man hits a woman calls the police, and sometimes instead of working things out, you have them battling against each other. And then what happens is the woman has the man put in jail, and then it's on. Then everybody's upset. So, and you've seen that happen.
And sometimes it's not necessarily that the woman wants the man to go to jail, but the laws require that somebody is going to jail. And so, you know, there is no conflict resolution there at all. Yeah. And again, what happens to the children, you know, in that situation? You know, number one, the children potentially have seen the domestic violence, if there was domestic violence, and then they've also seen the police called to their home, and then it becomes, for them, the police can either be viewed by them as friends or as foe, because they're taking their father away, or they're taking their mother away to jail. So it really, you know, and it's not just in divorce situations. You know, we were talking about divorce, but I think you know, there's lots of times in families, you know, even without a divorce, where there's many problems in a family. You know, there's substance abuse, there's you know, child abuse, there's all kinds of issues that cause the breakdown of a family, problems that exist. And Pam, I don't know in Kentucky, but in Kentucky, is there is the law that if someone if there's an allegation of domestic violence and the police are called, that someone has to go to jail? Is that true in Kentucky as well?
It's not an automatic. There's actually, as Connie was pointing out, there's a criminal element to domestic violence, but there's also a civil element. As a family court judge, I'm hearing if somebody files for an EPO, and that's a civil proceeding, and the amount of evidence that I would need to make a finding of domestic violence would not be as much as what Connie was dealing with in convincing a judge in a criminal case.
Right.
As a prosecutor, I'm sure she was referring to a criminal case. But whenever there is a domestic violence petition filed and an ECO, an emergency, or an EPO rather, an emergency protective order is issued, that automatically goes to the cabinet, our Child Protective Services, and there should be an investigation done within a certain time frame because they're concerned, obviously, about the exposure the children have. They may not have been hurt directly, but many times either the father or the wife, because domestic violence goes both ways. I think we traditionally think of it more as men perpetrating against women, and I think statistics probably hold that true. But there's been many times where the man has actually been the victim. So the cabinet's going to go out and investigate that. If it's serious enough, there may be criminal charges that accompany that, but it's actually two separate issues. And in Kentucky, and I'm sure Tennessee is equally true, emergency protective orders for domestic violence are accessible 24 hours a day. So I'm on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for anybody, man or woman, or if you're filing on behalf of a child, and a lot of times I have that, where there's been a threat, that there's a fear that maybe a parent that's getting a divorce or has been divorced is on drugs and they're afraid they're going to take the child unlawfully, maybe harm the child. So it's accessible 24 hours a day in Kentucky.
Okay.
But let me say something about resolving domestic violence. Again, 20 years ago, it was a boutique prosecution. And so as we put our organization together, and one of the ways we were going to measure our success was on domestic murders. You know, what are the number of domestic murders? So the first year we had our organization together were 25 domestic murders in Davidson County, which is Metro Nashville. The next year there was 11. We're like, oh, wow, we're doing a great job. The next year there were 22. So we hadn't solved anything. And again, because one of the things that we had done is all we had done was put Band-Aids on it, put a Band-Aid on it, put a Band-Aid on it, make it right and wrong, make it black and white, send the alleged perpetrator to a domestic violence class. We never sent the victim to a domestic violence class, you know, and I would say this is a dynamic crime. You know, this is a crime, this is the one crime that is dynamic. If you're at MAPCO and you get robbed at gunpoint, you probably don't have anything to do with that. But if you are in a domestic violence situation, there are always two players.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that people don't understand. And there's a family here. And there's people that at one time, a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, these people said, I love you and I care for you. And something happened.
Right.
And to just take someone and put them in jail, there needs to be, and even worse than that, then in the heat of anger, somebody calls the police, and then the next day, those people can't speak. They can't get back together by law.
Right.
So then the law comes in and prevents them from working things out because they want to protect them, and you understand that. But then there's a rift, and then there's even worse problems because then a person says, well, now I can't even talk, and then it gets worse and worse. So there needs to be something worked out. So maybe we need to move on because we don't want to spend this. We can spend the whole show on this. What are some other problems? We talked about domestic violence, but then there's other. You touched on drugs and alcohol, and I'm sure that's a huge problem in families. And again, we get back to, I think, no family member, no husband, wife, parent, mom, dad gets drunk for the good of the child. It all gets back to, I do this because I want to. What do you see, what do all of you all see as issues involved with these things that harm families?
Addiction is huge.
Right.
Addiction is huge. Capital H-U-G-E. Huge.
Capital Y-U-G-E? H-U-G-E?
Well, I was
How do you spell
trying
huge
to,
anymore?
I was trying to visualize that as I was saying. I was
right.
afraid I was going to misspell it on
Right.
camera here, but it's huge. And it's just not alcohol. I mean, it's opioids,
right.
it's painkillers, it's heroin now, it's ecstasy, I mean, the abuse of drugs and medications is huge. We are so far from getting anywhere close to any type of remedy, and it's devastating. I don't know how, you can't put a good Band-Aid on that.
Now,
Well,
you did mention meth. Is meth
Meth.
is
Yes.
a big a problem, or is it sort of
It is in
just
Kentucky.
out in the hills
no,
someplace?
no,
it's
so
very-
it still
no.
is.
Kentucky, that, and we also have a very bad heroin problem as well, and prescription drug addiction and selling prescription drugs illegally at painkillers. It's a huge problem.
And we have to figure out why. We have got to figure out why.
Well, I think it goes back to, we talked,
Social worker.
well, I think we talked, really, I know, we talked about putting a Band-Aid. We put Band-Aids on stuff after something happens, and it goes back to, again, where do you start? Well, you start at the beginning. You start at the beginning, and typically people, just don't wake up one day and say, gee, I think I'll become a meth head, or I'll become, pothead, or I'll become, addicted to opiates. That's not what people do. Typically people, get addicted to these things because they are in pain. And, I mean, alcoholism, it's to numb the pain. Well, where does the pain come from? The pain typically comes from something that happened to them in their childhood. Again, goes back to the family, the beginning of the family. And how do you stop that? Well, you can't. It's much easier to stop it before it starts than to try to treat it. Treatment is good, but again, treatment does not solve the problem typically.
People have to be receptive to treatment,
Yes,
too.
people
They
have to be receptive, absolutely.
acknowledging that they have these issues. Because sadly, I see so many women giving birth, and the
Yes,
child is
yes,
addicted to
yes.
whatever drug the mother was taking.
Right.
And and then you have children growing up, and you're going to have a generation that has completely unique health problems,
Yes,
emotional
yes,
problems,
right.
developmental delay problems, all because of the fact that they're primarily their mother, but there's some indication that if the father consumes certain types of
Right.
drugs, he can pass certain genetic abnormalities onto the child as
yes,
well. So we're going to have a whole generation of really unique issues that we've never really been faced by society on the scale that we're going to have it because of that.
What do you say to people that say, well, if we just, the libertarians view, well, if we just legalize this stuff, we wouldn't have the problems?
I personally think that would make it much worse. That's not addressing why the person needs it to begin with, as was pointed out earlier. I personally think that would not. I think that would make things much worse.
I do have to throw in there, and again, I got this from the internet, and it was probably posted on Facebook.
Well, there you go. Wikipedia is probably the
Right.
best.
Right.
But
Well, if it's
there
on
was-
Facebook, it's true.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
But there actually was a social experiment in Portugal related to addiction, and one of the things that they studied and that they believed was that the cure for addiction was belongingness. And they took addicts and they helped them get jobs, and they surrounded them with social support, and they gave them direction and guidance and mentors, active mentors in their lives. And they actually had a huge success with overcoming addiction without ever putting anybody in a 30-day rehab.
Which goes back to a family, which goes back to
Yes.
why do people become addicted in the first place? And typically, not always, but typically it's because of what were they missing in their family of origin? What didn't they get? What were the problems that existed there? And it could be that that their father was an alcoholic, or their mother was an alcoholic, or there was drug abuse early in their parents. But prevention, truly, the money that we spend on prevention, you get bigger impact for your money, and that's what governments are. We always want to throw money after the fact. Let's treat. But the truth is, preventing something is a much more effective tool than treating something.
Yeah.
And so you can spend less money on prevention than you can on treatment. But we've got to really get that into our mindset. And I'm hoping that the pendulum swings. We're all old enough here and been around long enough. Decades in this business have taught me that the pendulum swings about every 10 years. You go from prevention to treatment, and then you go back to prevention, and then you go back to treatment. And truthfully, we do have to have both. But I think that really beginning with the work with the family. One of the programs that we have at the center is the Healthy Start program, Healthy Families program, and it works with first-time mothers. When are you the most successful with helping someone to be a good parent? It's not after they have 2 or 3 children. It's when they have a brand new baby. You are the most excited think back when when you brought if we brought babies home from the hospital, if not everyone did that. Some people adopted, but when you bring a new baby home from the hospital, you are so excited and you want to learn and you want to know everything you can about that baby, and so that's the time to really get into a family and really make an impact with the family. And if it's a high-risk family, you make a bigger impact because you're teaching them before they ever learn bad behaviors or helping retrain them. So prevention truly is the key to that, in my belief.
And I'm so glad you said that because you mentioned two things there that are my hot buttons. One of them is funding,
Right,
and the
funding.
other one is prevention.
Yes.
And I am a big advocate for changes in the child welfare program. Most people do not know that the Title IV-E money, which is the foster care money, is $8 billion in the United States. The Title IV-B money, which is the family reunification,
Support.
family preservation money, is 1/10 of that amount, $700 million. The Title IV-E money is unlimited, and it is a use it or lose it program. I have worked for years to try to make changes in our state legislature as to how they manage foster children, how they rehabilitate the family, how they get them placed back in the family, and I wasn't making any progress. And I finally realized after I started studying the state budget, the reason I was making no progress changing laws is because 42% of their state budget was coming from the federal government, and the federal government was mandating what they did with that money, which was putting children in foster care, keeping them in foster care before they would help that family.
Wow. Moral of the story, federal government, bad.
You're right.
Bad, bad, bad. Stay tuned for more of that. So,
Yes.
Connie, you mentioned something that I thought was really profound there, is that the answer to addiction is belongingness. And this isn't a religious show, but we touch on that because that's part of life. That's who we all are. And isn't that what God sort of tries to let us know with the church, with his family, that he didn't just convert each of us to Christianity and put us on an island. He says, here is my people. I want you to be part of them. And that's what everybody is searching for, is to be part of something, someone. So you see all these kids go out and join gangs. Why do they do that?
Right.
Because they want to be part of something.
Well, and I think, you talked about the church, and I think the church is failing, miserably in that, being an advocate for adoption. If the church, we have, how many churches, look around, there's a church on every single corner almost in our communities, but if a church would take on, one child, one child, one church, there's a big push for that. But our churches are not really doing what I think God intended for them to do. Government is in our face, but really God intended for the churches to take on some of the things that the government's doing.
Sure.
doing.
What
But
did
the churches
James say?
For sure.
Yes.
Pure and undefiled religion is what?
To care for widows and orphans in their time.
hootenannies in
No.
the church
No.
building.
No, it's to care for widows and orphans
Pure
in
and
their time.
undefiled religion, caring for the widows and the orphans.
In their time of distress.
Yeah,
And
that's what
let
it's about.
And let me say another thing about addiction, because I know there's a big push from the medical model of addiction, that it's all about, it's a disease. There are, in the divorce business and family court business, we're dealing with people's lives, touching people's lives and getting intimate with people's lives. I'm going to tell you that there's a large percentage of people who are involved in addiction who have, what did you call them? Early childhood trauma.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
What
early
did you
childhood
call it?
trauma.
Adverse
Adverse
Yeah,
childhood
ACE.
experiences.
experience.
Adverse
And
childhood
it can be
experiences.
child
Yes,
sex,
yes.
it can be
Sex
sexual
abuse, right.
it
Physical
can be
abuse.
abandonment.
Right.
There is,
Rejection.
it's not just a medical disease,
No,
which
no.
is part of the medical model that the medical community wants you to believe.
What are the answers to the family problems? Is it all, everybody looks to government, the government that can solve it. But I'm convinced government's not going to solve it. It's going to be people, it's going to be churches, it's going to be people, it's going to be families, it's going to be individuals. We have to work together to do this. What are some of your all's ideas on solutions to this?
Well, I think the first thing we do is we look at ourselves, and we look at ourselves on a daily basis. What are you willing to do? What would you be willing to do if I asked you to do? If there was a family who was in need, who lost their job and was homeless, and were staying in a hotel, which under the child welfare standard is a homeless family, and they can take their children and put them in foster care, what would you be willing to do? And we've really got to look at ourselves and see what can we do to reach reach our hand out and help the next person. And, you know, we just, unfortunately, the political party of the Democrats have sort of brought that persona out and yet have placed it in the hands of the government. And you know, we should open our eyes as conservatives and say the reason that they have captured that is because those people need something and we're not doing it. So what are we willing to do as far as businesses, organizations, individuals to be able to provide that help to people who need it? If we don't reach out and make that change proactively, affirmatively, with passion, we are not ever going to get out of where we are now.
Right. The old I gave at the office, you know, well, it's taken care of. And in fact, there are some, I read a book one time that said one of the worst things that's happened to the church is the treasury of the local congregation.
Right.
Because sometimes people just put in the plate and say,
That's all I got to do.
I'm done,
Yeah.
because the church takes care of it. So I don't have to worry about it. If there's somebody poor, I don't have to worry about it. And I'm not talking about the scammer that's on the corner, you know, taking your money, but someone you know that needs help.
One of the things I used to do before I became a foster parent is I remember driving around my community, and I won't say which community it is because we all have these, you know, driving around and all these big houses with all of the people that I knew, that it was just a husband and a wife, but they had 4 bedrooms. And I remember thinking, why do you have 4 bedrooms? It's, you know, you only use one of those bedrooms and you have 3 bedrooms that are empty. And when I became a foster parent, I became even more, you know, convinced that, okay, you know, if you have an empty bed and there's a child in need, and I'm by no means saying that every person needs to be a foster parent, because you don't, but, you know, to really seek and say, okay, you know, what can I do instead of spending all this money on myself, you know, myself and my wife, you know, you know, but we don't think like that. You know, we think, okay, well, let's build a house in order to and have 4 bedrooms. We use one of them and the other 3 sit empty when there's homeless people, when there's, and that's what you're talking about, you know, what's the cost to us? You know, what are we willing to do to reach out? So, you know, the cure for social ills is, again, you're right, it begins with each one of us, you know, being responsible for, you know, not the people in another city, but your neighbor, you know, and again, how many of us even really know our neighbors?
Yeah.
You know, that's the other thing I think that happens to us is we become isolated, and families become isolated. And when they have trouble, they don't even know where to go. You know, they can't sure go to their neighbor, you know, and knock on the door and say, hey, you know, I'm really struggling. You know, we'll go ask for a cup of milk if we're doing a recipe. But if my baby's out of milk, am I going to go knock next door and say, do you have any formula? Could I borrow some formula? Could I borrow some money to buy some formula? We're not going to do that because we're embarrassed. You know, we don't want to let people know that we're in need.
There are many, many churches that have, you know, pantries and things that help, that do that. So let's touch just, I know there are a lot of us that aren't in situations. I'm a single man, so I can't adopt or foster, or not in a position to do that. But you have adopted
3 children out of the foster care system.
That's something that you were able to do, and you've adopted.
I have. My children are international, so they're now young adults.
Right.
Okay. I have a good friend that, in fact, we're going to do a TV show on him. He and his wife have a sweetest little baby that has Down syndrome, and they adopted 2 other children from Russia when they were younger. So there's a lot of opportunity out there to help people, and that's one way to do it. There's other ways to do it. Pam serves as a judge in family court and helps families there, and I do a TV show.
and Pam, I think probably one of the probably the best things that you do is when somebody does come before you. I mean, I know I've had judges tell me all the time when we go before them to, you know, for them to finalize the adoption, they say, this is the best thing we do. We love this. Because there's a joy in that, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely the high point of the job is to see, especially if a child's been in foster care, because you know, I would say on average, a child in Hardin County is probably going to have to stay in foster care somewhere between 18 and 23 months. It depends upon the circumstances. So it's a long time for a child. I don't think it is for adults, but if I know a child has been in foster care for a long time and they may have been with that foster family for most of that time, but it's still nice to know that that's being finalized for that child, and they're going to have some permanency. So that definitely is the high point.
We have about 2.5 minutes to go. Some closing words here. I really appreciate you all coming. Pam came all the way from Kentucky, and you all live locally here in Middle Tennessee. Appreciate all of your fine words and the great work that all of you all do. So any final words as far as solutions, maybe 20, 30 seconds apiece. What's the one thing that you could leave with our audience to help with families in this area?
Well, I'm going to say we all are about the same generation here. Let's just be real.
Right, yeah.
Okay?
We all knew who Andy
Yeah, who
we
Andy
knew who Andy Griffith was
right,
that we
right.
talked about before. But I'm going to tell you a tool that I have used. And again, you might think I'm odd, but I have used social media as a tool to reach down to another generation. And I have about 4,500 members of a group that we have, the Family Forward Project, and we have another one called Innocent Families. And there are families there in all types of dire situations, either losing their children or trying to get their lives back together. And I mean, in our private group, actually, people post some pretty horrible things. I mean, they're depressed, they're losing hope. They're just ready to kill themselves. I mean, it's incredible. And I always use that opportunity to strengthen them. And it's just a word or a paragraph. It's just pick your head up. I encourage you to stay with us. As adults, we have got to reach down to those 20, 30, 40 years younger than us and give them a hand, even if we don't know them from Adam.
Sounds great. 10 seconds. Either one of you?
Well, I don't know that I could really top that. That was pretty wonderful. But I think that for families that are contemplating divorce that doesn't have some extraordinary circumstance like domestic violence in it, just, try to be kind to your spouse, try to be open and honest, and maybe consider counseling and the effect that it's going to have on your children, the impact, and just kind of apply the golden rule maybe on a larger scale.
Okay.
Pray.
Pray.
Absolutely.
Pray without ceasing.
Pray without
1
ceasing.
Thessalonians
Yes,
5:17.
Yeah. More time praying.
Appreciate you all being here. This has been a great couple of shows. Thank you all for listening to VeritasPopuli.